Hello, everybody. It's me, Dread Pirate Maki, and today we're going to be talking about student loans. So, if you agree with the $20,000 forgiveness, stick around. If you don't agree with the $20,000 forgiveness, also stick around because we're going to talk about both sides. Welcome to Burn the Ships. First off, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. I think this is going to be a podcast that you're going to find very interesting, and it's going to be a lot of very good discussions. It's going to be a little bit unconventional. It's going to be a little bit, let's talk about some hard things, some tough things, some things that don't make sense in the world, some things that don't make sense with regards to religion, pop culture, entertainment, politics. That's probably going to come up, so be prepared. This is what I like to think of as an uncancelable podcast because I'm going to have some friends on. I'm going to have some people I respect on. I am going to voice some opinions that I have and that I like to consider and think about. But it's not in a way that I want to alienate anybody or anybody should feel like necessarily their opinion is wrong. Now, I also want to preface that by saying it really bothers me in especially the last probably 10, 20 years that everybody has to feel like they need to apologize for what they say before they say it. So kind of like I just did. I want to express my opinion, but I don't want anybody to think that they're wrong. Like sometimes you are wrong and sometimes I'm wrong. And I'm completely okay with being told that. I just need to be told that in order to learn and be a better person. So the goal with this podcast, and how it relates to the name, actually. We're going to go over that in just a second. But the goal of this podcast is to be able to express different opinions from myself and also hear out and discuss different opinions from differing people to not necessarily change my mind or change the person I'm talking to's mind, but to change your mind, the listener. I want you to be able to hear out my side, the other person's side, and then split the difference and be able to maybe think outside the box and, come to a conclusion that you may not have come to otherwise, or that may not have been illuminated in that way. I know a lot of social media, Twitter especially, Reddit especially, if you even use that, TikTok, don't even get me started on TikTok. A lot of those places just don't allow you to think outside the box. If you think outside the box on something like TikTok or Twitter, you're immediately just going to be told how wrong you are and told how stupid you are and told how uneducated you are. And usually, for the things that I've been attacked for anyway, it's somebody that completely fits the stereotype of what they're saying, if that makes sense, in like a non-hateful kind of way. Happens a lot on Twitter. I've expressed a lot of bad opinions on Twitter. I am fully aware of that. Most of that's years old, and I don't even think it exists anymore. But so, all that to say, I think this is going to be a good and eye-opening podcast, at least for me. Hopefully it will be for you as well. Stay tuned and tune in. I'm not sure how often I'm going to post these. I haven't really decided yet. Because at this point I'm just doing it on my own. But stay tuned if you want to think outside the box, possibly, discuss some opinions that you may not have thought of before. And generally, hopefully it's enlightening. I'm hoping that it's going to be an enlightening experience. If not, that's okay. We can change the format. I'm not sold on this. I kind of want to see, how it goes. Because I haven't seen much like this besides Joe Rogan, and that kind of fits because he'll talk about like anything with anybody. But he also gets a lot of hate for, I think, no reason. First hot take. So first off, burn the ships. What does that mean? As you can see, if you're watching this, if I even post the video, I've got a burn the ships flag. That's from Relentless Betrayal. Not a sponsor yet. So the historical reference for burning the ships is from Cortez. He and a bunch of his men, however many he had at the time, on an expedition to take part of America, I believe, or the New World. And they got there, and he said, burn the ships. And they were like, what do you mean? We need this. Like, well, no, we're either going to go back home on enemy ships or we're going to die trying. And they burned the ships, supposedly. And 2 years later, he conquered the area he was in. So, I just think that's a really cool story. And a really cool, phrase, just burn the ships, like, put your all into it kind of thing. The other part that, fits more with this podcast is burn the ships in like a, Boston Tea Party kind of way, like stick it to the man, cause, purposeful chaos. Don't take things laying down. Don't let people walk all over you. That sort of idea. So that's usually the way I'm using the phrase, is burn the ships. So that's kind of how it is. That's how I'm thinking about this podcast, is a way to not incite like chaos. I mean, that's not the point. That doesn't help anybody. But just accepting the status quo for what it is the opposite end of that, and it's just as unhealthy. So what I want this to be is controlled chaos, purposeful chaos, being able to have maybe chaos in this podcast, but causing the listener, you, to be able to make a better informed decision and to kind of like fine tune the way you interact with life and the way you go about your business in a way that betters you and the world. So that's the goal. That's what I'm looking for through this podcast, and what I'm hoping that you will get as well. Please enjoy, and let's look at our first topic. So again, this will be a little more fleshed out once I actually have, another person that I can, consider with and talk with. My first topic I wanted to talk about is the student loan forgiveness, because that's what's in the news right now, and I see a lot of, hot takes about it on both sides. What I'm looking to do is I'm just going to discuss kind of, my perspective on it, and then I'll also discuss some of the pushback I've gotten for that, and then we'll go from there, and we'll kind of see, where we get to and where this comes for you, the listener. And if you are watching on YouTube or somewhere where you can comment, please let me know. Comment, tell me what you came up with and why you either agree or disagree with maybe what I said, or how maybe it changed your opinion. So student loans is obviously a pretty controversial topic anymore. It's not something to take lightly, because there's so much money involved, unfathomable amounts of money involved. But everybody seems to have a different perspective on it. So we haven't ever gotten anywhere until this point. Usually the red side is saying, pay for what you owe. You borrowed this money, you better pay for it too, son. Like that sort of thing. Or like, why should I be responsible for your student loan payments? Like that sort of thing, which I've got some thoughts on, but not necessarily out of line logically. And then the other side says, which is usually the blue side, says, we need to forgive all student loans. Money is just made up. It's not really going to make any difference anyway. Just forgive me of my student loans because I made a bad decision. That's usually the two extremes that we hear. So what's my opinion on this? I'm very happy with the decision that was made. I wish it was the 50, because that's what Biden promised as a campaign promise. So we were still stiffed, and I'm upset about that, but we'll talk about that in a second. My final thoughts on this anyway, we'll go with my final thoughts and work backwards. So I think it's a very good decision. I'm very happy that I have some of my grants and my financial aid forgiven, about half actually. So that's really going to help me out. I'm not at all struggling right now. I mean, I've got a nice house, I've got a TV, I've got a mic set up. Like, I'm not one that can't pay my bills at this point. I was a couple of years ago, but I am not at that point now. Now the other side of that conversation is, do I want, like, the way I'm paying for this is not what I enjoy doing. It's what I have to do right now because it's my job. So A, I'm good at it, but B, I don't enjoy it. So what's the ethics behind working a job that you don't like to be able to pay for a degree that you don't have? You know what I mean? So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. I want to talk about that later. So here are my couple bullet points of reasons why I'm really glad that this all happened. A, I am not using the degree that I went for. Now that can come in a couple different, a couple different scenarios. Mine is very specific to me, so it's not necessarily going to match what everyone else's situation looks like. But I am very glad because I'm not using the degree that I had. A. B. I was told the degree. I was made well. So okay. So I wasn't told by one person. This is the other thing. Is like nobody told you had to go to school. That's usually also another argument that red team has. That's that's not really what I want to talk about now. But yes, it is very heavily implied that you need to go to school in order to get a job, a good job, because the same people will complain and berate fast food workers and Best Buy workers and that sort of thing because they're uneducated and they didn't have a job and they weren't good enough to go to school like I was, and I paid 50 cents for my whatever. I'm just making fun of people now, but that's usually where this goes, and that is definitely a logical fallacy because you can't demand that people get it right the first try every single time, or be berated as essentially a workforce slave for the rest of your life working at Chipotle. Yeah, you can be a manager. Yeah, you can be a district manager, but do you really want to spend 50 years being a district manager for Chipotle and being like rained on every 5 seconds from like the people in corporate that got a degree that you couldn't get? Yeah, there are just a lot of complexities to this. So the specifics to my situation are I went to a Bible school for 2 years, just straight Bible. That's it. That's all it was. It was good knowledge. I use it a lot now, like the critical thinking skills, the processing of information, stuff like that. And I know a lot about the Bible. I'm actually qualified to be a pastor. But I don't use that because that's not where my passion is. It's just all I knew as a child. So again, this is a pretty specific scenario to me. It's not gonna, resonate with everybody, but I'm very glad because I didn't know any better at the time. It's all I knew. So I went to Bible college. And there are a couple problems I have with that is I also, again, specific to me, I really enjoy film, cinematic arts, acting, writing. My presence on camera possibly reflects that, I hope, because I also have student loans through that. I'm going to get to that in a second. But so it's not like my choices were either pastor or like engineer or some sort of scientist, like marine biology. You know what I mean? Like my brain doesn't necessarily work like that. I work much better in a creative field versus like a test taking performance based, if that makes sense. I can do the performance based. It's just not how my mind works. So I have to, it's an extra step for me. So not only did I have my first 2 years of school, which actually is almost that full 20,000. And there's one more year that I think is included in that, but that's my next step I'm going to talk about. So not only is my first really 3 years, like 2 years of school, completely Bible, something that I was not taught was relevant in the real world. It's not going to help me get a job. Even if I had a 4-year degree in theology, like no one cares. No one's going to I'm not going to be able to get, financial gain from that. So should this school really be charging students money for a degree that will not pay them? Now, the other argument is, well, you can be a pastor, go be a pastor, but that doesn't always work out. That's the other qualifier is that you have to, be perfect the first time, and you have to make all your right decisions without pressure, without doing something to please somebody else, without really knowing what you're getting into because you're 18 years old. There are a lot of, especially for my scenario, there are a lot of facets to it because there's a lot of people pleasing in Christianity. There's a lot of pressure to do one thing or the other with very large scale eternal consequences, if that makes sense. A lot of bad advice given. I told so many people, mostly older people at my church, because there was as churches usually are, there's not as much of a, younger presence. But they were all thrilled. They were like, great. Like, that's so amazing. Like, I'm so glad for you. Like, God's going to bless you so much. Amen, amen. Like, that sort of thing. So from my perspective, I was making a very good informed decision because the adults in my life were telling me that I was making a good decision. That was not a good decision because most of those adults I found out later, um, you know, well, I found out later, meaning like I matured and I understand the workforce world better now. Um, they done, some of them haven't never had a job. Some of them worked for their children who started a business, like stuff like that, where they didn't need to have this work because they just lived in a completely different time. The first reason that I'm very, very thankful that some of my loans were forgiven is because I was put in a situation where I thought I was making a good decision and it was not a good decision. Now again, yes, I did legally, sign the papers and I went through it, and I honestly I wouldn't change it. I would still probably do make the same decision now, knowing what I know and how it changed how I think and how it, like I said, process information, critically think. So I'm thankful for the schooling. It's not necessarily that I wish it never happened, but I do wish that the adults along the way, all those years in high school and in college, didn't keep trying to push me towards being like a missionary for Word of Life, because that makes Word of Life money. It's all just a business. Like in the bottom line is that it's all just a business. Like the maximum you'll make through Word of Life is like 30,000 a year, and I make more than that now as like a sales rep at a phone store. So if you can see where I'm coming from, I was pushed into a place where I didn't know I was making a bad decision. There's not much money to be made, that sort of thing. And my question necessarily isn't, should I be responsible to pay those? Because I am responsible to pay them. And I would have paid them. I'm not going to, let them go into default and ditch them or something like that. I mean, you can get arrested for that or something. I don't know. But my question is, should a school like that be accredited in the first place? Now, this is a bigger, more and more of a monumental, ethical, what do you believe kind of question. But I think that even if you do believe, because my beliefs have changed a lot since I went to Word of Life. Even if you do believe that that's true, if you're a full hardcore Baptist Christian, where I used to live, would you look at a Mormon college that only teaches Mormonism and is accredited and charges you money, tens of thousands of dollars a year, to get this education that is taught as truth, is taught as absolute truth? You need this to get into heaven. You will go burn in hell if you don't know this information, like that sort of thing. Now I know that's a little extreme, but just for this case. Or a Catholic school. Catholic schools exist, but would you be okay with, like, does it sit well with you that there are colleges out there charging tens of thousands of dollars per year to teach young people Catholicism? They're charging them for it, and it's not something you believe is true. Now, again, beliefs are subjective. Beliefs are not necessarily the determining factor in whether or not something is worth learning. But my point here is that, it's not a black and white decision. It's not like I came into this cold and was like, I'm going to do this. Like based on facts, I'm going to do this based on the amount of money I can make, based on whether or not, I think that way. If it's like the sort of like the marine biology thing, like I don't necessarily think academically, I think more creatively. So is it something that I'm going to be able to do well and perform well in my life? Like these were not questions I was asking when I went to school. It was like, is the Bible true? Yes, I believed. So therefore I should learn more Bible, because that's all I knew is church. So I went to a place that was comfortable for me, that I was pushed into going to by people from my church, because it felt like the next step to staying in a safe bubble, if that makes sense. So I realize that was kind of long and drawn out, but all that to say is I don't believe that schools like that should be accredited. I think they could be extracurricular. I think they could be like electives. I don't think it's bad information. I think if you want to go learn about Mormonism and get credits for it, it should be counted as an elective, not, you know, Bible. Because once you start attaching like, well, this is a Bible class, then well, like what about the Book of Mormon? Do you have to have a Book of Mormon class? Do you have to have a Quran class? Like, how are you going to classify that to a world that doesn't necessarily believe that is true in reality? So my argument isn't that I shouldn't be responsible to pay my dues, which I'll get to in a second because I did go to more than just that one school. My argument is that I should not have been pushed into. Now, again, I did make the decision. I don't want to. I don't want to pretend that it wasn't my decision to go to Word of Life because it was. My parents didn't push me into it, but the culture around me pushed me into it. So I'm not putting blame on anybody here. But my question is not should I be responsible to pay that back? My question is I have been charged for that in the first place? The other piece of this story that I didn't get to yet is most of the teachers at Word of Life were not actual professors. They were, pastors that had been working in a church for 30, 40, 50 years. They were authors that wrote books about the Bible with like a theology degree. Some of them were great. Some of them were amazing. Some of them were really good. And I still use some of that foundational teaching in how I think today. But that was kind of the exception, not the rule. Maybe 1 out of like 8 were really solid, good. This is how you apply this to your real life. This is how I want you to process this information. This is how I want you to decide whether or not this is true. And they were like, I would believe it's true, but this is why I believe it's true. So that was good. That's how it's supposed to be. But the majority of them were very, very disconnected from the world in 2010 when I went. Is it ethical to charge me, the student, a year's worth of college education while also making me work a part-time job there, like in the kitchen, to keep the cost down? That's a little sus, but that's a different topic. When your teachers aren't actual professors, that's my biggest complaint, is that I was charged this money for schooling and I got like pastors that were hired from like local churches and who have been working with Word of Life since they graduated Word of Life. Like it's this like large circle jerk kind of thing. Should that be ethical? No, absolutely not. I don't think that's ethical at all. If you're going to proclaim yourself as a school, it wasn't a college. It did say Bible Institute. I'm aware of all this stuff. I can feel comments coming already. But it was a school and it's accredited under the United States of America. It's accredited. So essentially it's college. I mean, it is college classes. It's just not considered a college because they only teach Bible. But I don't think that should be ethical. I don't think it's ethical to tell a student that they're going to college and then get like your pastor friends to come teach. You know what I mean? Or like, hey, we're Word of Life and we qualified these people to teach for Word of Life, so therefore Word of Life considers them professors. Like it's the same Bible logic. You know what I mean? Like the circular reasoning of like, well, the Bible says it, so therefore it's true, and we know that it's true because the Bible says it. You know what I mean? That, regardless of what you believe, is a huge red flag. If somebody comes to you with that style of thinking, if a job offers you something with that sort of style of thinking, if somebody treats you that way in a relationship, it's a huge red flag. You should not be listening to people like that. So on those grounds, I think that Word of Life should not be accredited. Or if they are accredited, then they should have to teach the current scientific understanding versus what they believe, that they should be legally required to, at minimum, teach the current scientific belief. And if you want to then teach Bible on top of that, that's fine, because then you can compare. You can be like, "Oh, this is what science teaches. This is what we know. This is what we believe to be true, but this is what we know and we have discovered based on science. So let's compare those two things and either split the difference or, come to a conclusion that way." It shouldn't just be like, go teach all the Bible and not give any actual real world teaching or experience. But they're going to accredit themselves as having real teaching and real world experience. So it's a logical fallacy to me. It doesn't match up. And that's the grounds that I stand on for why I'm very glad that the student loans have been forgiven, or at least some of them. Why I'm actually happy with 20,000, even though we were promised 50. It's something. I mean, it's a start, but we were promised 50. I think we should get 50. But after Word of Life, I went to Summit University. They're also a Christian college, but I didn't take any Bible classes there. So that I'm okay with, because a lot of my, like, the way I think through directing, through acting, through creating a scene, being able to communicate an emotion or a feeling through an actor and getting a result from an actor, writing scripts, public speaking, which I'm not great at because I say a lot. I don't know if you noticed that, but I've tried so many times to stop that, and it just doesn't work because my mind works slower than my mouth does. That I'm completely okay with paying from a Christian college. I'm okay with that. It's just the requirements, the legal requirements at the school for Christian service and living like your adult leaders want you to live. It's not necessarily a legal thing. It's pressure. Like, the teaching I got from there was good. My film professor, my directing professor, my writing, all of them were excellent. They're very good. I don't think they all liked me because I didn't do great in the classes, but I definitely learned and I chewed on it a lot, and I'm a much, much better producer for it. So I appreciate all of that. My concern with that is the toxic pieces of that scenario at Summit University, just for 1 year, came from Christian culture. Because I was supposed to act a certain way with people. I was supposed to present myself a certain way. I wasn't supposed to do certain things, like that sort of idea. And I didn't even do any of those things that they were like upset about. They just weren't comfortable. What I think was my dorm leader was not comfortable with it because he committed some of those things when he was young, and he was living vicariously through me and thought I was going to do it too. I don't know. But regardless, I was punished like I actually did, like I committed essentially a rape on campus. So that's not cool. It's part of why I have anxiety now. Legitimately. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but on my way back, while being escorted by campus security, and being threatened with, like, "We will talk about this tomorrow, like you were in, you're in big trouble. We'll talk about your education in the morning." My nose bled because I was so concerned and I was so scared. Now, again, I don't have a way to prove that to you. It wasn't like kind of like huge nosebleed, but I was like, "Oh, my nose itches for some reason," and I just did like a little, you know what I mean? And there's blood on my fingers. So if that says anything, if Jesus sweat blood because he was so nervous, if I was so caught off guard and so afraid of what was going to happen because I was being, quote, falsely accused, that the blood vessels in my nose broke, that's pretty extreme. That was my first step. That and a couple other things later on throughout that year are legitimately the reason that I attribute taking meds for anxiety at this point. So all that to say, like I said, this is very specific to me. I'm just kind of, telling you my story. But this is the reason that I'm okay with not paying some of those those funds that I borrowed, because that is not what I signed up for. Um, and that's not what you should sign up for as in college. You know what I mean? Like, these are not problems I should be talking about from college. The things I should be talking about from college are like, oh, I accidentally failed out of a class, or I forgot I forgot about an exam, or I didn't do well in my in the first play, but the second one I did much better because I got a tutor. Like, that's what I should be talking about. So notice none of these problems I've been talking about have had to do with education or classes or grades or normal school stuff. It's all been extra outside, pressure from the Christian community. And in conclusion, that's the reason that I'm willing to accept that $20,000. I'm completely happy with it. It essentially brings me, it covers the first 3 years, so Word of Life 2 years and Summit for 1 year, and then I moved to Liberty, and that was under Cinematic Arts. I didn't take any Bible classes there either. That's another reason why where I took script writing and I took film analysis and music analysis and stuff like that. Excellent teaching, and I'm 100% okay with paying for that, even though I'm not using it, because I'm using it now to be able to set up my mic, to be able to be a personality on a camera, stuff like that I really enjoy doing. Even if I'm not doing that as, like, that's not making me money, I legitimately really enjoy it. So, and there aren't many of those things left. So, I'm completely okay with paying for that. That piece of the story is much shorter. There were other things, that happened outside, but they weren't caused by the school. They were outside the school in the workplace. So that's my main argument, is I believe that I'm willing to accept that, because I don't think that my schooling in particular should have charged me what they did. Now, on a larger scale, I realize that that's not everybody's case. That's not everybody's scenario. Um, but I think the $20,000 that we're all being given, or 10,000 if you don't have a Pell Grant, but $20,000 that we're all being given, is a good buffer, because the culture around and the business around selling promised benefit to 18-year-olds that can't even legally buy, cigarettes or alcohol or join the army, but they can borrow, $40,000 per year for school. Like, that, that's so unethical, in my opinion. I think there are better ways of going around it. I think that there's a better way to get, I'd say kids, young adults, educated without just loading them up with as much money as they want, sort of like they do in, like a hospital, when you get the bill and it's $22,000, and then you ask for an itemized list and it goes down to four. You know what I mean? Like, they just charge what they want to charge. So the fact that it's the culture and the business around schooling is such a mess, I think the $20,000 is a good buffer to just kind of take some of the fluff off the top that really wasn't necessary anyway. It's just how it is. So yeah, let me know what you think about that. Let me know if you agree. Let me know, any thoughts you might have in comments. Feel free to sub on YouTube, Dread Pirate Maki, or Army Studios. And I will see you guys on the next one. And I hope this is going to be a fun podcast.